You are listening to KC Sports Network, the #1 podcast network for today's Kansas City sports fans. With former players from your favorite teams, informed perspectives, and former insiders, this is the place for you. KC Sports Network is proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
Hello and welcome into another 3-Mod Pod. I am John Kurtz. I am joined by Derek Young of K-State Online and Cole Manbeck, former beat writer for the Manhattan Mercury, and my travel partner this past weekend down to Arlington, Texas, where K-State won the freaking Big 12 championship 31-28 in overtime. Ty Zentner game-winning field goal, as thrilling as it gets. We've now had some time to digest it a little bit after Cole and I gave you a very, I don't know, I would say in some ways, but I felt meek. You know, I was tired. I was exhausted. I was in a hotel ballroom that we broke into and probably shouldn't have. We were running on hotel Wi-Fi and just totally running on fumes. So now, I had a chance to drive back, take in some of the game, get a little bit collected, and now here we all are. Plus, we've got Derek, who was experiencing everything with the players after the game, and so we'll get his insight here as well. Now, I know lots of alcohol was consumed this weekend. I can only imagine that you guys really got after the 360 vodka and the Ben Holiday Bottled and Bond bourbon, but continue to do so. Just, you got a month here. Just drink straight through for a month to get ready for the Sugar Bowl. They like to do a lot of that in New Orleans. You're going to need to prepare your liver if you're going to do okay down at Bourbon Street on New Year's. So anyway, check out Holiday Distillery, Ben Holiday Bottled and Bond bourbon, 360 vodka. We appreciate their support as always. Great K-State folks that support our pod. DY, I feel like we have to start with you. Cole and I gave our instant reaction in the glowing aftermath of all of this. You can see our literal instant reaction on my Twitter account with the video that I posted of Cole and I reacting, with a nice close-up of Cole's face at the very end of said video, looking as intense as I've ever seen him. DY, why don't you take us through your reaction, up in the press box? You have to be Mr. Stoic up there. What was your reaction to the Zentner field goal?
Probably trying a controlled amount of joy, I would say, because you are in the press box, and that was probably the case for many of us media members. Obviously, we have to stay kind of even-keeled and non-biased in our approach to this particular industry, but I think we all do have, of course, a investment in Kansas State doing well, and sometimes a cheering interest as well. And I think that was probably the case for every media member. So a controlled amount of joy, trying to keep it professional as possible. But that was, once they got to that field goal, and I don't know if you guys had this response at all either, because admittedly I haven't seen your live show yet, because I've kind of been going from one thing to the next at this point of everything that has transpired. But and it wasn't even because I saw Ty Zentner smiling and laughing, which is a perfect amount of crazy that you would expect from him, knowing who he is through the last 3 or 4 years at Kansas State. But there was zero concerns. I guess and I know that probably sounds weird because of everything that was at stake in there, but there was not a part of me that thought Ty Zentner was missing that field goal.
Oh, same here. No, I had no fear. I don't know about Cole, but I was especially once they lined it up, I was like, man, this is like a 30-yarder. This guy's been amazing. It's just barely over an extra point. Like, it's going to be fine.
I always get a little nervous with college kickers, even though Zentner's a total stud. But I had my phone out recording the moment, so I wasn't too nervous. If I was overly nervous, I wouldn't have been watching or would have not had my phone out. So I was confident that Zentner would come through. And as soon as he kicked it and it wasn't blocked or anything, I knew he had it. So, man. Guy's a total stud. He's unbelievable. He's now put up 38 kicks on the year and 29 extra points and 9 field goals, and all of them have went through the uprights. In that game, and we'll get back to DY here, but I did want to note, because we didn't touch a ton on his punts in the live show immediately after the game, but 3 punts down inside the 10-yard line in the game for Zentner. And I think the biggest one, John, and you and I were a bit surprised by this, and DY, curious for your thoughts, but the last punt of regulation that Seth Porter makes a really nice over-the-shoulder catch on to pin them at the 6-yard line. If that's a touchback, I think TCU tries to go and get a field goal. But by pinning him inside the 6, putting him inside that 10-yard line down at the 6, causes them to take a knee. Sonny Dykes decided to call a timeout. Then they decide to kneel it down. And with 3 timeouts and 38 seconds for that TCU offense, as explosive as they are, to get them to take a knee there was huge. And so that punt was tremendous, and the play by Porter to get that ball down inside the 10 was a big play.
If you were going to ask a special teams coach, this was my response and reaction to that as well. As good as Ty Zender was on the other punts, that one was probably not a very good punt because it took a miraculous play by Seth Porter that you can't necessarily expect a special teams guy to do. I mean, you're catching that over the shoulder. It's really tough to locate the ball when you're from that vantage point. You need a much more hang time there and much more of an opportunity, maybe even a bounce to make that play. Seth Porter probably deserves 99.9% of the credit for that one. Ty Zender will probably tell you too. Seth Porter probably saved his butt a little bit on that one. That wasn't his greatest kick of that game. Probably not necessarily even that close. And I guess going back to the overtime period there, when Kansas State after the miraculous goal line stand, which I'm sure has been touched on an inordinate amount, deservedly so at this point. I will say, like as confident as I was once Zender had that lined up beautifully right in the middle of the field. I guess to kind of take it easy on my nerves a little bit, I was hoping for one of the first few plays just to kind of bust out and just be an easy touchdown. I think that would have been a little bit less dramatic and nerve-wracking on all of us if it had unfolded that way. So I was hoping. I think Chris Clyde did play it right. Once he got the third down, and I think you're like 6 and 7 at that point, or you don't want to necessarily push the envelope too much and make a critical mistake in that juncture. So I think he gave in on that drive at the right time and was pushing the right buttons before that too, because it looked like he was definitely trying to go in for a score if he could get one. So I did like that approach, and he did even list out the hypothetical after the game. At TCU scored, K-State had not gotten that goal line stand, which I don't blame Sonny Dykes for going for it on fourth down there, but Chris Kleiman said they were going to go for 2 and go for the win if TCU scored, and then they responded with one of their own.
But I really liked a lot of how he handled all of that and what we heard after. Now, I guess it's one thing to say we were going for 2 and another thing to do it in the moment, but I would certainly take that at face value and believe it. But he said very emphatically, like, I wanted to get 1 first down. Like, we were definitely going to play for 1 first down, which I liked hearing that. It's not going to be just, hey, run it 3 times, and if it goes for 3 yards and then we got to line up and kick this 40-yard field goal, like, no, go get yourself 10 yards, make it much more manageable. They did that. And then, yes, after that, once it got to like third down, I'm totally cool with just get your kicker as comfortable as possible. What they call that, like the Wisconsin play, to go move the ball over and then just sit on it. Run that out there the way Zender's been kicking. There was no reason to have any outs of lack of confidence for the guy to go knock that through. And hey, I was feeling, and I told Cole in the moment, I was like, the only way they're winning this game is if they score and go for 2. So I'm glad Kleiman felt that at least also, because some of our criticisms about him over the years have been like not being aggressive enough in those types of situations. Like thinking back to that first year, not coaching aggressively enough down 3 possessions in Stillwater, things like that. It seems like he's come around to that now, and maybe some of it too with a team that he felt really confident in, believed in his guys. And I think those are signs of growth from Kleiman as a coach actually in game.
I would agree, because I think if I was still to come up with maybe a weakness in his game that popped up multiple times this year, or like in his approach, and you kind of got to think maybe is taking strides forward because of what happened late in the game is like the clock management late game, like how you're going to manage the time on the clock, the down and distance, do I punt, kick field goal, go for it here. I think at least at one point that was probably where I think his weakest point as a head coach was, because not every head coach, not even the best head coaches, were an A+ in every category. That would be the category where I probably draw the most criticism for him. And even in that department, he has made strides.
Yeah, there have just been a lot of strides taken across the board. Obviously, one of the biggest ones, figuring out that he needed to make Colin Klein the offensive coordinator, and now we see here what he is. He's being hyped up and lauded as one of the best in the country. I literally just heard it on the Solid Verbal this morning before I popped on here with you guys. After the game, speaking of Coach Kleiman and company, what was the press conference like? Anything interesting, anything of note coming out of those guys after the game?
Nothing specific. It was probably more when we spoke to Chris Kleiman yesterday for the Sugar Bowl thing. A lot of euphoria, obviously. This was, the culmination of what the hype video that they put out, from the Big 12 championship. And I think everyone probably has this observation to take away, but the most powerful moment of that video was them reflecting back to 2020 after the Iowa State game and showing that particular speech from Chris Kleiman after they just got their ass kicked 45-0 by Matt Campbell and company. Yes, it was the COVID year, but they got their butts handed to them. That was the year where they kind of self-reflected, self-identified that they needed to take that culture to another level, to another step in order to win the championships that they had gotten to Manhattan to do. And just hearing in that speech, you just lose by over 6 touchdowns and not score a point. And in that speech, you're talking about, this is what we're going to do. This is how it has to be done in order to win a Big 12 championship. Pinpoint accuracy, like a specific goal. He talked about the Big 12 championship in the middle of a tremendous losing streak in 2020 after getting their butts beat 45 points to, nearby Iowa State. And, just seeing that video and Will Howard's right there, in the front row, kind of taking it all in. Number 15, not number 18 at that point. Still making the critical, that was his first year, true freshman 18-year-old, making the mistakes that kind of catapulted that losing streak and exacerbated it. But, it's just something poetic about seeing that video and it being, over 2 years ago, that kind of loss, and speaking about a Big 12 championship in that moment, and having Will Howard, who basically kind of jump-started this little streak at the end to kind of get you there to win it, I think is pretty poetic.
Well, it not to the same extent or significance, perhaps, but it takes you back to Bill Snyder's opening statement of his opening press conference as Kansas State's head coach, when talks about it, the greatest opportunity to turn around a program exists here today, and it's not one to be taken lightly. And then he followed through on it. Obviously, that was more significant than this because this program was the worst in America out of all the Power Fives. But to be that prophetic, and also just to have video of that moment, to be taking video in that locker room after such a difficult loss and have that in the archives to go back to, and what he spoke to, it's an incredible moment. And I'm sure most of you that are listening to this have seen that video, but if you haven't, you need to watch it. It's amazing, emotional video to watch, and pretty darn special. So Chris Kleiman helped change the culture, recognize there were culture issues at that point, and from there, the program has really taken off.
Yeah, and the video kind of illustrated also to just kind of the euphoria that we kind of saw in the post-game press conference, especially from like a Julius Brents and a Hayden Gillum, the euphoria and the joy. That video illustrated it. We saw it in the post-game press conference too, so that would be another takeaway of mine. And Daniel Green being up there. That video, you basically see, grown men bawling because of what they had just accomplished. And one of those was defensive coordinator Joe Klanderman, Daniel Green, Felix Andy DK Uzama, Malik Knowles, Ty Zentner. A lot of raw emotion and tears spilled just because of the gravity of what they knew they just accomplished, and where they started from is probably where that kind of is built upon. And that start definitely seems maybe like that locker room after the Iowa State game.
Yeah, absolutely. I always look at that as the lowest of low moment. Now, there were some low moments in 2020. Arkansas State was not good. Lots of drama and things happening off the field. You had the moment where all of a sudden, like 19 guys are transferring. But no, to me, it was definitely Iowa State. It was going and playing that game, losing the way that you did, just feeling like you were so far behind them as they went on to have their year where they made the Big 12 championship game. And just felt like you were miles away, having a clean house. And I'll be honest, I would not have expected at that point in time that within 2 years they'd be sitting here as Big 12 champions. It is truly remarkable that they made that much of a turnaround in the culture that quickly. But it started with a new strength coach. I think Tremaine Carroll deserves a lot of credit here in what we're talking about in terms of setting the culture and helping create a much better environment. And not that it was poor before because of the strength coach, but getting younger, I think a more relatable, if we're being honest, strength coach to a lot of these players really has helped out a lot. So that's another guy. There are so many guys that you can recognize for their roles here, but I think he's somebody, Tremaine Carroll, that deserves a lot of credit here.
I would agree. Some of it's also just maybe younger too, more relatable, but sometimes all you need is a fresher face in the front of a room too, with just a different approach. Sometimes you just, things can get stale or, whatever reason, and all you need is maybe a different voice. And sometimes it just resonates a little more because of that, just because of that freshness. I think that played into the Tremaine Carroll thing, but that's a great observation. I think that deserves, I've kind of written about it before. I think it was maybe this past off season, that culture breaking moment. Yes, it happened in the locker room, obviously, after that Iowa State game and a speech that Chris Klieman made. But I think the first real change he made after that season was hiring Tremaine Carroll. So the spark of the culture, when it first was beginning to build in Chris Klieman's vision, I think the first step was hiring Tremaine Carroll, and maybe not by accident. And I know Cole sent this picture from that video, and I also made that observation kind of in my head at the time. But Chris Klieman jumps up and down when Ty Zender makes that field goal, and the first thing he does is jump into the arms of Tremaine Carroll.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that, DY. How fitting that the very first person that Chris Klieman hugs and jumps into the arms of is Tremaine Carroll at the end of that game after the kick goes through. So, yeah, I think Tremaine Carroll was a huge hire for this program. They're bigger, they're stronger, and it was also a culture change. And from a mental standpoint in that locker room, a mentality change. And so that was a huge hire by Chris Klieman. He recognized there was a problem. And as you've said before, DY, the guy that spends the most time with the players is the strength coach. Strength conditioning coach, have them all in the off season all the time. And you got to be able to respect that guy. And K-State's players certainly do.
Is there any talk in the press conference about who's going to play and who's not in the bowl game?
No, it was at the bowl game, Sugar Bowl press conference, the webinar thing that we have with Chris Klieman and Nick Saban.
Did you ask Saban a question?
No, I didn't. I didn't even ask Chris Klieman. I couldn't think straight yesterday for the most part. But
well, I saw Kellis said he asked his first ever question to Nick Saban, like in a McDonald's parking lot on a hot spot in his car or something crazy.
Yeah. He was driving home from Dallas, I believe, still at that point because obviously it takes a little bit to drive home. I had flown home for this particular trip, so I was already there. But no, I didn't ask Nick Saban a question. I think Kellis asked him kind of about Kansas State, and Nick Saban basically said, we were recruiting. We thought we might be in a playoff. I haven't looked at a second of Kansas State tape. That was basically his answer. So
really?
Almost a non-answer at that point, which makes sense.
I saw a quote where he said something about, he's like, they've got two effective quarterbacks, a really good defense, and a really good running back. I mean, I saw someone was at least a blueprint in a way.
Yeah, I think that was when someone asked him and made him kind of expand a little bit more, and he gave that kind of vague interest. And at one point he said that coach too. So I was like, I don't know that Nick Saban knows anyone's name that might be associated with.
Really? Where's Ben Newman in this networking thing? I mean, can't you get him to?
He did say Chris at one point, because then he said, well, I have a lot of respect for Coach Schneider, and Chris seems to have continued that. So.
Yeah, well, Saban wouldn't know anything about K-State yet because he was too busy doing his car wash media tour, trying to campaign his way into the college football playoff for the 24 hours leading up to yesterday. So, which was a joke.
Fortunately, that did not work. But Chris Klieman, I guess kind of going where I was going on Sunday evening for that little webinar thing via Zoom, did reveal that they believe, and now they might have to miss some practice time between now and then, but they believe both Malik Knowles and Echo Boy Doe will both be available after being injured in the Big 12 title game against TCU. In terms of opt-outs, because I know that's going to be probably a pretty big discussion point at this point, and this is probably maybe a little too early for me to say, because college athletics is a weird place at this moment, but I do not think that Kansas State will have any voluntary opt-outs from significant contributors. I mean, I think most people probably made that conclusion once, Deuce Vaughn was on that video taking questions from Reese Davis during the selection show. He was talking about playing in that game. He certainly approached that interview and talked as a guy that had every intention and was valuing the opportunity that the Sugar Bowl would provide him.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I guess the question would be Felix, right? Because Felix is the one who's going to be a top 100 pick in all likelihood, I would think, heading into the draft. And I know Cole mentioned this to me, chance to play against Bama is a chance to really up your draft stock. It definitely is. It also could be looked at if you're his agent as like, hey man, if you're already in the first couple of rounds, it's also a good way to have your draft stock shoot down if all of a sudden you're not going to perform well against the type of offensive lineman that you're going to see at the next level. So I don't know that.
And he's already banged up, so that could also contribute to it, right? So certainly it would, you see guys in his similar situation opt out quite a bit. Let's be honest, that happens, especially he's banged up. Even if he has an opportunity in front of him to increase his value, he is in a spot that anymore 80% of the guys do opt out. So I will not eliminate that possibility. I will say the people that I've spoken to in the last 24 hours, I certainly don't get the impression that he's leaning that way. I'll say that.
Yeah, we know he's been banged up all year, right? But now he's going to have 4 weeks to recover. And this would be an opportunity to really flash who he is, right, against Alabama, because he's going to be probably as healthy as he's been all year and as explosive he's been in this Alabama game. So, I mean, I think there's a real opportunity for him to have a great game. And I'll have to look into the Alabama offensive line. Look, I know their starting left guard has already entered the transfer portal, who hadn't given up a sack all season, I believe. And so we'll see what else happens with that Alabama team and opt-outs on that end. But I think the culture that Chris Kleiman's created, look, ultimately some of these guys are going to do what's best for them individually, but I think the culture they've created helps alleviate opt-outs from occurring. I would be a bit surprised if anyone impactful.
I just disagree with that. I don't think opting out or declaring early or transferring is a sign of a culture that isn't good. I don't think culture.
Well, I'm not.
I just don't think culture is connected to these decisions because they are individual ones where there's millions of dollars on the line. And to play devil's advocate, if you're Felix too, yes, there is 4 weeks to maybe get healthier for the game, but you're also saying, or he could aggravate that injury even more and be even more banged up that it hurts your draft, that it makes you unable to have a draft lead up in preparation, right? It could affect him working out for teams at that point.
I mean, I think culture can play a part. I'm not saying like if you have an opt out on it, like if Chris Kleiman can't say an opt out, I'm not saying like there's a culture problem in the program, but I do think it's more meaningful for K-State's players on this stage than obviously Alabama playing in the Sugar Bowl. And I think the name opponent of Alabama will keep a lot of these guys engaged with the opportunity to play on that stage, while it might be a little bit of the opposite for Alabama. So they see Kansas State's name and probably don't get as excited. They have playoff aspirations, but for Kansas State, this is a huge opportunity and a big stage for them, with it being a New Year's Six Bowl and being the first time ever to play an Alabama football program on that stage. So I don't know. I guess I just don't, like you, DY, to your point, I don't see anybody opting out. But
yeah, at this point, I would be surprised. But yeah, see, you could say that Felix has more time to get healthy and be fresher for the game and maybe kind of have a liftoff point, or you can say, what if it's still a little bit there, he aggravates it, and then it affects the way he can prepare for the NFL draft. I mean, that's something that they'll have to consider as well. There's all of these things, multiple angles, but in terms of like the culture thing, I mean, maybe I'm not going to say 0% there, but I think a bowl game of this magnitude against an opponent of this magnitude for Kansas State, I think it helps them more along the lines of guys in the transfer portal rather than the guys along the lines with potential NFL draft looming.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it seems to me, if you have a good culture, it stands to reason to me that there would be a better chance somebody would be swayed by some of the positives that we're outlining here, right? I just think it's another pro in the pro column if you're making a pros and cons list of what you would do if you're around a team where you're kind of like, these guys are fine, don't love them, don't have this like intense brotherhood with them. Then maybe you're going to be more inclined to start pushing yourself to the other side and looking at those benefits and not getting hurt, as opposed to being like, oh, I've been around for a long time. We reached this peak and now we're about to go play Bama in the Sugar Bowl. I love these guys. I love this culture. Like maybe this, I just want one last ride here since I'm not going to get it next year. Like I would imagine it could affect it a little bit. But
love for teammates. I won't deny it. Just the other side of that is just, a very powerful decision with, all of us, we're in our jobs for a maximum amount of money too. So there is a twist and a pull and push there that I imagine is a pretty conflicting decision and a tough one that they'll all have to make on their own. And that maybe Kurtz understands or knows about this more, but I also think, and I wonder if it plays a part. It probably certainly will for the guys that are staying in school and either you have the opportunity anymore. Basically, you have the opportunity to stay at your specific school or go into the transfer portal, and I'm sure that's going to be a discussion point the next few weeks too, because the transfer portal window has already opened. It opened today. That I think many of the Kansas State players, and look, I know this is kind of weird for maybe people that haven't delved into this area yet of NIL, but a lot of these guys have representation now because you can kind of have that with NIL, and they kind of guide you on what to do and what not to do. I think many of the Kansas State players are actually represented by the Lockett family.
Yeah, I mean, I know Aaron's had a relationship with some guys.
Felix, right? Felix.
He definitely has. I think you're right. I think you are correct about Felix. I would have to double check on that. But yeah, that maybe that helps out. I mean, I wouldn't begrudge anybody. I certainly would not begrudge Felix if he decides to not play. I totally understand what's on the line there, but for a guy that was crying at the achievement of the Big 12 championship, I think it's clear that all this does mean a lot to him. I'll be interested to see what that winds up being. I do want to talk some unsung heroes here because Cole and I chatted about it, but I know DY, you have a little bit more insight probably on, the Keenan Garber situation, for instance, before he gets thrown out there as a defensive back. So we'll get to that coming up next here on 3 Mod. All right, back on 3 Mod, John Kurtz, Derek Young, Cole Manbeck with you here. Plenty of unsung heroes to come out of that Big 12 championship game. Keenan Garber, less than a month after transitioning from receiver to defensive back, gets thrown into the game with an Echo Boydo injury in the first half. And we were sitting around in our seats literally asking each other, who is 35? Like, what is this? Who is 35? And having to figure that out and realizing that it was Keenan Garber, and then you're freaking out. Like, what is this? Just a backup receiver now playing it in the Big 12 championship game against number 3 TCU with Quentin Johnston and all those dudes. It was very scary, but more than held his own. We can start there because I want to learn more about this. I think you've said this, DY, but I kind of just let it breeze right over my head and was like, okay, cool. Like Keenan Garber's working at backup defensive back. Okay, when will that affect anything? I won't have to worry about that until all of a sudden I did in the middle of a tight Big 12 championship game. So what was the genesis of this and how well did you feel like he played?
According to Chris Clyde, Garber went to them about a month ago and said, I'm not getting it done here at receiver. It doesn't seem like there's much of a path. I think he was just looking for a way to help. Maybe that shows maturity there, and maybe that's the culture again, kind of creeping up and making an impact. And they said, okay, let's try this. Be on the practice squad, work your butt off at corner, and give our receivers a big time look each week. I don't know that this decision was made with any other thought beyond that. I don't think it was like, you know what, you're going to play in the Big 12 championship game at quarterback in a month, so get your butt ready. No, I think it was like, make it tough on our receivers, show your, selflessness, be unselfish. And then if you do that well, then we'll readdress maybe your path to playing time in the offseason and find you a good spot. Instead, Echo Boydo gets hurt. Keenan Garber, I guess, you throw him on the other side of the ball and it starts to really click pretty quickly to the point where, if we're being honest, and this is not to cut down these other guys, but they seem more inclined to be comfortable with Keenan Garber on Saturday at cornerback than Jordan Wright and Omar Daniels. But now Jordan Wright was playing special teams, so he certainly headed in the right direction as well, I would imagine. I remember he picked Kansas State over Florida State, West Virginia. That guy was a pretty clear Power 5 battle at the time in this past offseason. And then Omar Daniels did play some quarterback as well. They played them both because Julius Brents lost his helmet, and then they went to Omar Daniels, I think, at one point. But Keenan Garber, not a liability, played pretty well. I think we got to get him a new number. 35 is pretty ugly for a corner. But, you can't say enough good things about that. His unselfishness to do what he did, and then to even invest himself enough in it to give himself this opportunity when push came to shove. Like, they could have just went Omar Daniels and Jordan Wright. But clearly, Keenan Garber made this move, and he was very invested in it and embraced it. And, one of the more underdog, weird, unexpected stories that I think I've covered essentially in my career, a guy that was playing offense 4 weeks ago is now a corner in the Big 12 championship game and making clear contributions. It's pretty stunning. Says a lot about him. Also interesting, obviously it's because Echo Boydo went down. Jacob Parrish was playing a little bit of safety because they're so thin there as well. And he's a true freshman. VJ Payne leads the defense and snaps as a true freshman safety because of all the guys that they are missing. So you lose a Lawrence guy and Echo Boydo, Lawrence High. And where do you go? Well, let's go with the Free State kid and Keenan Garber. So twist the knife a little bit on KU, a little bit more, I guess, because it's Echo Boydo and Keenan Garber in their backyard doing that for the Wildcats.
Well, a couple.
You were about to jump in and defend the honor of Dyshad Carter, weren't you?
One of my favorite corners, Dyshad Carter. See, John and I are.
I was like, man, 35, good old Dyshad Carter back in the day.
Yeah, one of K-State's better corners. Had the pass breakup against Nebraska in the snow game in 2000, right? Too. So. Yeah, DY, obviously, we wouldn't blame you that you didn't know that, but
he can get number one back after this year. Josh Hayes will relinquish it when he graduates, and Keenan Garber can be number one on defense again.
Okay. Yeah, well, a couple things that you brought up, DY. I mean, obviously, Keenan Garber was in Chris Kleiman's first recruiting class and never looked like he was going to see the field. And just kudos to him for not giving up, not entering the transfer portal, which I said on the live show afterwards. I just expected Keenan Garber to enter the portal at some point because it clearly wasn't clicking at receiver, but to go to the coaching staff, ask to move positions and do it all in a month and pick up the scheme to where he can go in the game in the biggest game of the Chris Kleiman era in 4 years and play effectively is something I don't think I've ever seen before. It's just astounding how well he played too. How many, do you know off the top of your head, DY, approximately how many snaps he played Saturday? I felt like I saw him out there a lot.
Keep talking and I'll find it.
Okay, yeah. He was also, like, I was looking at John during the game. He was also out there on special teams for a lot of snaps as well on all the return units, etc. John can allude to this. The Julius Brents helmet coming off when K-State got him in 3rd and 15.
I was losing my mind a little bit too. Yeah,
I was pretty upset that K-State did not call a timeout. I was screaming, call a timeout. It was such a big play, a big moment. Your best corner off the field with Quentin Johnson out there, 3rd and 15.
But I think because I trust this other person that has rewatched the game. I guess Quentin Johnston wasn't on the field either. So TCU wasn't subbing because they wanted to keep Brents off the field. And K-State was like, well, Quentin Johnston's not on the field, so we're not worried about it.
Yeah. Well, they ended up getting – yeah, I didn't realize it either. They ended up getting him in a 4th and 3 because Duggan scrambled for 12. But Brent still stayed on the sideline, and then they ran a QB draw with Duggan and got the first down. And I was just losing my mind that they didn't have Brents on the field at that time, that they didn't get the timeout call. But I digress. Everything worked out. Jacob Parrish, we talked about him on the live show afterwards, but you brought his name up, DY. One of the things that really impressed me, like he doesn't look like the biggest guy in the world, but like I watched them, they adjusted on one play specifically. I just watched, like, they signaled to each other, Brents and him, that they were going to go up, move up and play bump and run. And I watched Jacob Parrish physically get up in that receiver, a much bigger dude for TCU. And he was right there with him playing physical. And I wonder, like, his arm length, like I saw the play where he batted a ball down, like his arms he looks like he has pretty good wingspan. He's obviously got great speed.
His wingspan is good for his height, but it's still not exceptional. And that's where he will have his problems when they do occur, because he's going to be a sticky corner that is good, but he is limited. And it's Julius Brents can get away a little bit, right? You can, if you're 6'3" with like a 6'5" wingspan, you can get beat by 3 steps and still make the play. That's why length is so important, because it gives you that margin for error. Jacob Parrish will never have that. He's going to have to be an extremely sticky corner, so that makes life tougher on him. Because if he's not in someone's grill, because you're talking about him getting up in someone's grill, that's his only way to succeed. But he can do it, so that's a good thing.
Yeah. Can Can you believe, DY, that they held TCU to their second lowest points per drive of the season, and Max Duggan's worst passer rating and completion percentage of the entire season, playing so many freshmen, so many guys like that? I mean, Keenan Garber obviously isn't a freshman, but he's a new body out there. Jake Clifton was in on the goal line play on the 4th and goal. I always butcher Damien's name, so I always rely on
Leo, Damien
Eli Leo. Yeah, I got to get that nailed down. Because he's a redshirt freshman and going to be a good player. And obviously, BJ Payne, you mentioned, played every snap of that game. Jacob Parrish, a true freshman. Yeah. I mean, it's just there were so many new guys out there. Yeah.
21 snaps.
Okay. That's a pretty good volume of snaps for entering the game and around the second quarter. So, man, they played so many younger guys too. It just makes it look like they built quality depth. Like you've talked about it before. Like the thing that's different for K-State's program is they typically don't have that too deep of some of the other, schools, right? DY, a lot of these other Power 5 schools have more of a too deep because of their recruiting nature. But it seems like K-State is starting to develop that depth because they had a lot of guys out there that were backups that were playing meaningful snaps.
I would agree. I can't say it. No, and I think you were saying, would you expect him to hold TCU? No. I mean, I picked a 41-38 game. So
was Mitch pounding his chest up there? He picked it 31-28 with a Zentner walk-off field goal.
He picked 31-30, but he had Zentner walk-off field goal. Yep.
Yeah, on Power Cat game day. That's the first thing I thought of when Zentner made it. I was like, wow, Mitch nailed that call.
He did. Shout out to Mitch on that, and it worked out about his. In retrospect, I was kind of like, it would have been nice to not have the muff punt and to win that game by a couple scores, because it really, really felt like without the muff punt, K-State was en route to winning by 10, 14, maybe something like that.
At least. Yeah.
Had all the momentum in the world. Offense was moving the ball. I mean, so luckily we're not talking too much about that play because it was a huge momentum swing. But
I
just
thought
in terms of experience, overall game experience, to get the game-winning field goal the way that it did and all that. I mean, I don't know, Cole, if I would trade it here on the opposite side of it, especially because it helped TCU stay number 3 in the playoff bowl.
And they traded it, right? That was a disaster swing for K-State. You just went up 21-10. You forced that 3 and out, I think it was, or whatever. And then Phil Brooks muffs the punt, and they score and make it 21-17. And then I think K-State went 3 and out or had to punt. And then TCU was going down, take the lead, 24-21. So, this was not just a 14-point swing. This was looking like it was going to be a 21-point swing, right? And then Max Duggan, hell of a game, but made his only mistake because he had man coverage, Julius Brents throwing it. They were already in the red zone, and he just underthrew that ball by about 10 feet and give Julius Brents the easiest interception of his career, which he had the second easiest interception of his career a little bit later in the game. He dropped it.
So there was a couple things I was going to hit on. We talked about the Brooks muff punt on the live post-game show, but we didn't really talk about the Brents dropped interception, which was a huge play in itself because that also could have essentially ended the game. There were 10 minutes left. K-State was up 11. Brents drops what should have been his easiest interception next to the other one. I mean, he breaks off, and on the rewatch, you'll see this, but he and those of you watching on TV live, you saw it, but he was covering another guy on a post route and saw the throw and veered off and was right there to make the interception. If he makes that, I mean, K-State's got the ball up 11 with 10 minutes left, a couple first downs, and TCU's in real trouble. So that play hurt as well. I would say, John, I wouldn't trade the way that game ended. Now, it may have shed a year or two off my life at the end of the day, but the way that it unfolded is going to make it all the more memorable. I mean, you still hear people talk about the Miami goal line stand in a non-con game. People are going to be talking about this goal line stand by this K-State defense forever. It's going to live in the memories of K-State fans. Walk-off field goal, overtime. It's probably, I'm sure the TV ratings, as we talked about on the live show, probably went through the roof near the end of that game. A lot of people probably tuning in. It makes it all the more memorable and all the more special to have a walk-off winner in that moment. So, yeah. Yeah.
Have not been able to complete the entire rewatch of that to relive it again, but I'm going to need to, because the overtime, the goal line stand, maybe I said this in the immediate post game, but I just was checked out, pretty dejected. I had made up in my mind, like, the only way they're winning this game is by scoring and going for 2. So I wasn't even really paying that close of attention. Like the fourth down stop, I was kind of just like stop and gather myself and look around. I was like, you guys, like now we can basically win this thing, right? Like, how did this happen? It took a minute for all that to settle into me, but awesome moment at the end. I love the Twitter thread where I asked everybody to submit their videos of reactions to the Zentner field goal. Was awesome. Just a great thread full of stuff. I got to give a shout out to Kites, man. The Kites video was crazy. That was probably my favorite one. Like Kites reacting to the win was insane. Great work to the folks that were there. Very much appreciate that. Where do we think this win stands all time for K-State? Want to have that discussion? We can take a break beforehand. I'll give you, in real terms here, you're only going to get about 10 seconds to think about it. But let's pretend like you're going to have an actual break here to think about this answer and then come back with the answer. That's next. All right, we're back. John Cole, DY. Where does this win rank all time for K-State, Cole? I think we decided 98 Nebraska, 2003 Oklahoma stand in front of it, but then beyond that, it's pretty open for debate.
Yeah, we talked about this on the drive home from Arlington yesterday for a little bit, and I saw a bunch of people tweeting about it too, where it ultimately stands. I think 98 Nebraska definitely and 03 Oklahoma stand in front of it just because of the significance of the Oklahoma game and the Nebraska game, but Oklahoma was regarded by so many pundits as the best team ever going into that game. And it was K-State's first Big 12 championship. So, and the dominant nature, that one's got to stand above this one, as well as 98 Nebraska when you consider what Nebraska had done to Kansas State for 30 plus years. So those two are in front. Now, I think where you could make the argument, I haven't seen a lot of people mention this game, but the 97 Fiesta Bowl is right there for me with this one, because it was, I have this one ahead of Texas in Manhattan in 2012. That Texas team was finished. Yeah, I saw people trying to include the Texas game. Look, it clinched the Big 12 title. It was on your home field. That was special, but Texas was ranked like 24th in the country. They ended up being an 8-4 football team, I believe. You fully expected to win that game. You beat a top 5 team in the country on a neutral field in that environment in overtime, and it's the first of the Chris Kleiman era. That one's got to stand. And plus the disappointing nature of the way the Texas game, just losing to Baylor 2 weeks before that and the national title hopes being dashed. This one proves that Chris Kleiman, look, we already knew Chris Kleiman by now was the right hire. This just cements that Gene Taylor made a hell of a hire, the best hire that season by any athletic director, and one of the best that you've seen in the last few years by a program. So, yeah, I think I would have it right there with the 97 Fiesta Bowl. Maybe I give it the slight edge, but that Fiesta Bowl game, beating Donovan McNabb, winning in the fashion they did on New Year's Eve, a massive party, K-State's first Alliance Bowl victory.
Tim Brando on the call with Ed Cunningham. It kind of jolted the program up when we talked about this to that 98 season where K-State was a national title contender, and kind of, the program soared from there. So I would have it right there with that one, top 3 or 4. TY, I know you're not the historian. Do you have any opinion that you want to offer here? I think I'm living in the moment like recency bias, so I'm giving it a slight bump as 3, just ahead of 97 Fiesta Bowl, because you're bringing back a conference championship mainly is why I'm doing that, and a new era, establishing someone else can win a Big 12 championship here. I think all those things are very important. But I fully admit that I was 8 when the 97 Fiesta Bowl happened. I loved it. I remember it. I still have a sweatshirt from it, but I'm gonna give a slight edge here. I would say number 3.
And I think you could make an argument. Top 5 also, I would probably include 03 Nebraska on the road, just because first win in Lincoln. So
I think the discussion that I've seen too that will be interesting. Let's hypothetically say Kansas State beats Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. Does it become the best season in Kansas State history?
Yeah, well, and the key distinction there is saying best season versus best team.
Mm-hmm.
Best team is a totally different discussion, because 98 is going to run away with that, but their season ended in such. FUD does not even begin to describe how the 98 season ended.
We probably shouldn't talk about 98 too much.
So then you are talking 97, where you're 11-1, broke through and beat Colorado that year for the first time in forever, when that was still a streak. beat Syracuse in the Fiesta Bowl, kind of announced yourself on the national scene, finished in the top 10. There was a lot of good that happened there. 95, they finished number 7 in the country, which I think was tied for the highest. I think 2002, they also got up to about that because they won bowl games in both of those seasons. 2002, they beat USC. They beat Carson Palmer. That was fun in the non-con. So, I think these are your contenders if you're talking about best season. But it'd be real hard to argue against this one in terms of the accomplishments that this team would have put together by the time it was said and done.
Does 12 get eliminated too because of the way that finished?
I would say so, yes.
So it's like 98.
Yeah. So if they beat Alabama, I think we looked it up, John. The best finish they've had in the rankings was 7th in 95. Is that right? What you confirmed?
I think they've twice been 7th.
Okay.
I think it was 02 was the other one I was looking at where they did also finish 7th.
Well, I know they don't. You reminded me they don't do a final playoff poll after the bowl games, but and I'd have to look at what's K-State in the coaches poll.
I don't even know if they came out of coaches poll this week. I only saw the AP where they were 11.
Well, a bunch of those AP writers, a bunch of hacks vote in that poll because that poll's a joke.
What were they in the coaches poll after 10?
Cole, we've been incorrect. They finished. I just pulled up the year by year. They finished 6th in 1999. So 99, they were 11-1. It was kind of this sounds crazy, but this is how it felt at the time for sure because the program was so good. Kind of a boring 11-1.
Well, that was the year that K-State relied on several big-time come-from-behind victories against teams that weren't very good. Remember the Iowa State game in Ames and the Oklahoma State game in Stillwater, where K-State fell behind by 3 scores. Jonathan Beasley, got replaced by Adam Helm in the Iowa State game. They struggled at various times that year, and they got beaten down by Nebraska pretty handily in Lincoln. And I think a large part of why that felt a little bit disappointing, John, is because it was on the heels of 1998, and there was still that lingering disappointment that maybe not as great of an appreciation from me for that season, but it was still a heck of a year. It also sucked that they had to play in the Holiday Bowl against an unranked Washington when they're a top 10 team. And, the K-State always got stuck playing teams in bowl games when they were far and away a top 10 team playing a team that was maybe ranked 25th or not even ranked. And that always took a little bit of the buzz out of it, like Arizona State in the Holiday Bowl, Purdue, obviously, Washington, et cetera. I digress. But yeah, if you beat Alabama, Clemson plays Tennessee. So one of those teams is going to lose ahead of you in the poll. You beat Alabama, you're going to.
Jed, our producer, said coaches poll has K-State number 9.
Okay, yeah. Well, I've always respected the coaches poll and not the AP poll. So
the AP poll sucks. There's a dude that had K-State at 15 and UCLA at 11 this week.
Yeah. Six Pac-12 teams ahead of K-State. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So that's what you're kind of dealing with there. I will say, and you guys are better at this than me, of course. So that's why I kind of threw the question out to you two more than opened on my own. The 3 losses, though, it has to come into play, though, right? When we're talking about best season. I mean, it's hard to say. It's still hard to say this one with 3 losses. One of them being a Group of 5 school.
Yeah, well, it's a Group of 5 school that's playing in a Year 6 bowl, though. I mean, it's that takes a little bit of the pain out of it.
5 school that's only a 2.5-point dog to USC.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. What's Caleb Williams' status?
Well, the details, John. Shh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, I was a little disappointed K-State was 9th in the playoff poll. I honestly thought they'd go up to like 8th or 7th, but
got jumped by Utah, which is interesting because they K-State beat number 3 and Utah beat number 4.
Yeah, I mean that's I'm sure going to be about the amount of points they beat them by. I would also say, I mean, Caleb Williams was hurt, so that helped, but they did beat him up. So I don't know. Whatever. I'm not going to lose a ton of sleep over it. Where you would have lost a ton of sleep over it is if this were the 12-team playoff era. That would have been the difference between having a bye in the first round of the playoff, having a home game after that, avoiding Georgia, or Utah jumps you. You're no longer one of the top 4 conference champions.
The home game either.
you're in an 8-9 game on the road at Tennessee with the winner going to play at Georgia, or
Yeah,
the winner going to play Georgia in a neutral site. So it would have sent you from a bye and a home game to a road game and then Georgia if you happen to get through it. It ridiculously big swing there if this was a 12-team playoff.
It was funny because someone asked Chris Kleiman on that Sugar Bowl webinar, is like, oh, if there was a new playoff and you would be at a home game in a first round, how cool is that? And Chris Kleiman just basically said, I don't really talk about hypotheticals. But he literally just dismissed the guy completely. It was the last question. But that is interesting, right? Generally I do like the format of what they're doing with the 12-team playoff, and for people that hate the expansion, whatever. I don't really think your opinion matters at that point. But it's interesting. I do think there might be a chink in the new playoff format if that's what happens, right? You're one step away from a bye and a home game while winning your league, but just because you get jumped by the Pac-12 champion, now you don't even get a home game, and you got to play in the first round in Neyland Stadium against Tennessee. Maybe it doesn't matter in this hypothetical world, because, man, maybe you like your chances against Tennessee without Hendon Hooker.
Yeah. I wouldn't have minded playing Tennessee with Joe Milton at quarterback, to be honest. But getting Alabama, and I would say, I also, just looking back as we talked about most impactful games or most meaningful games where this ranks, it is pretty cool to think that K-State beat an undefeated number 1 ranked OU in the Big 12 championship and then beat a 12-0 TCU in the Big 12 championship. 2 unbeatens that were top 4 teams in the country to win both those occasions. It's pretty darn special. So
did I see it right that Chris Kleiman's 5-2 against top 10 teams at Kansas State?
That is correct.
I was going to say, because Oklahoma wins, he beat them 3 times, and then Oklahoma State and now TCU. So, and what was it like last year? What was the concern was last year? They didn't beat anybody good last year, really, right?
Well, last year was the Snyder 2.0 special. Yeah, it was like beat everybody below you in the standings, lose everybody above you in the standings.
Yeah, and this year they took the next step, and they beat teams not only that were good, but they beat teams that Chris Kleiman hadn't beaten before, like Baylor and Oklahoma State. So he got the monkey off his back with that, and now they beat every Big 12 team this season outside of Texas, because they got the revenge game against TCU. And I did want to mention a number we talked about after the game in that TCU game, something I thought was impactful. TCU 2 of 15 on third downs. DY, and I thought this was what occurred, but on the live show afterwards, I couldn't recall exactly. TCU got their 2 third down conversions on the first drive of the game. They went 0 of 12. Yeah, they went 0 of 12 on third downs the rest of the game. And that's a TCU team that went 10 of 19 against K-State in the previous matchup on third down. So that was huge.
Another crazy Chris Kleiman stat that I saw, and I went back and it's it's absolutely correct. And it's pretty astonishing considering that he's probably played many Power 5 teams just once from his time at North Dakota State, right? He has beaten every Power 5 team that he has played except for Texas.
Yeah, I was about to step in with that. Like, well, he hasn't beaten Texas. We know that, but
except for Texas. But every Power 5 team he has played in his coaching career, he has beaten.
Got one over on Texas this year, but didn't actually beat them head-to-head. That is correct. Let me close with this. Big recruiting time here. I know the coaches immediately were off recruiting on Sunday after winning the Big 12 championship on Saturday. So what should we expect? When is signing day? A week from Tuesday or 2 weeks from Tuesday? What do we got here?
It's 2 weeks. It's December 21st. I think it's Wednesday, right?
The 21st. Okay, so that would be 2 weeks from Wednesday. Yeah. So biggest storylines to be watching here over the next couple of weeks for K-State on the recruiting trail. Have you seen? I know Drew gauging the responses of different recruits across the country to K-State's Big 12 championship game win. If you have anything exciting to share on that front, I'm all ears as well.
I don't know if anything is too powerful there. I think that before December 21st, you're going to see – well, how about this? On that day, I think you're going to see between now and then, Kansas State probably add additional linebacker help, probably additional receiver help potentially, and probably high school guys. We're thinking there, maybe JUCO. We're thinking there, and it'll be interesting, the transfer portal, especially, obviously, right? In this month of December, and probably part of January as well, because you're going to see Kansas State dip their toes into those waters probably pretty significantly as well. And just to see how many that they can accrue in that time period and who it is, right? And it'll be interesting in what positions, because there is a large swath of these guys that are going to be entering the transfer portal between now and when that thing closes, which I don't think it's till January 15th, in that neighborhood, the second week of January, maybe the 13th, because they're going to probably want to be enrolled for spring semester, a large swath of them, right, to be able to participate in spring football. Kansas State, really, the ones you got after the spring period didn't necessarily help you a ton, if you want to look at it that way. So this period will be pretty important. It's going to be a sprint. It's going to be hard to cover too for me. But they're going to have to address wide receiver in the transfer portal in some way, I think. And a name that really pops out, I think, that everyone is aware of probably at this point, if you keep a close eye on it, is Arlen Bruce, the wide receiver at Iowa. I imagine since the portal opened, I know he had already stated his intentions to enter it. I imagine he's in it now. He's already submitted his name. That would be my guess. And if that's the true, then communication is now permitted, direct communication. And it would surprise me if the two sides weren't engaged. And if Kansas State decides that they want to pull the trigger and take him, I don't think that there will be a lot of resistance there. I think he is theirs as long as they want him. I'm not saying they don't. I don't know that for 100% fact. And that makes a lot of sense in many ways. As most know, he's an Olathe North product.
What does he bring to the table as a receiver? I honestly have no idea. I've not watched. It's shocking. I've not watched a lot of the Iowa offense.
Well, he played as a true freshman at Iowa, and that doesn't happen a whole lot. So probably tells you maybe his acumen there in that department. He was a running back in high school. A little smaller, a little on the smaller side. Maybe he's a perfect replacement for Phillip Brooks. I don't know if he's really the quintessential slot receiver, so I couldn't tell you all of that. He was tough as nails in high school. I know that, and he had more receptions at Iowa, I believe. I think I'm looking at the right guy here. I'm thinking about the right guy. He had more receptions at Iowa this past season than Charlie Jones had at Iowa before he went for like 130 catches at Purdue. So. Yeah. People are like, oh, we don't want anyone associated with this Iowa offense. But on the surface, I totally understand that notion and that approach. But if you want to take this into account, I think 20 catches at Iowa is like 150 in most places.
Yeah.
Well, Iowa's problem hasn't been wide receiver talent necessarily. It's been the quarterback room. I mean, they've had good receivers there over the years.
Their other one, Keegan Johnson, that's in the portal. It wouldn't shock me if he ends up at Nebraska. So.
The transfer portal deadline, I just looked it up to confirm, December 5th window to January 18th. So have to enter by January 18th, 45-day window to enter the portal.
And so for those trying to educate, because I know this is the first time in the transfer portal, that's to enter. You could actually make your choice whenever. Yep.
Yeah. I saw Josh Manning was at Topgolf with Eli Drinkowitz, photo posted on Twitter. So I'm sure Drinkowitz was smoking another cigar with them.
Six and six cigars, ducking KU.
Drinkowitz probably pulled the driver out, hit it 20 yards, and lit up a cigar to celebrate because that's who he is. So.
Just can't. But I mean, like, sweet. We get to see Missouri and Wake Forest. Something the world has been dying to know, whether or not the Tigers could match up with the Demon Deacons this year.
Gasparilla Bowl.
Is that in the Tampa Rays Stadium, TY?
No, I still think it's Buccaneers, right?
Oh, it's the Buccaneers. Okay. They used to play one bowl game in the Rays Stadium. I was really hoping that's where Missouri was destined. It's probably not suitable for football anymore.
Oh yeah, I don't know if they really. I mean, I don't know if anyone's allowed to play in the Trop. I mean, they might as well condemn that thing.
Yeah,
but it would be fitting. Would be fitting to drink with slap cigar and go play in the Trop.
Right. Yeah. Hey, by the way, guys, I was just looking at K-State's numbers earlier today. Did you know that they have now passed for 2,737 yards this season and rushed for 2,725? They're 50-50 on the dot.
Balance.
Yeah, talk about balance. So I thought I'd throw that out. That's pretty crazy.
The balance is like two sides of the season, right? Where they're one of the most explosive rushing offenses in the first half, one of the most explosive passing offenses in the second half.
That was one of the funny. I made it through like a quarter and a half, I guess, of the rewatch of the game. And that was one of the funny things to me that I kept hearing him explain. They're like, yeah, I mean, I know you think Bill Snyder, and there still are some elements of that, but like they do. I was like, thank you, Herb Street. Herb Street finally was like, they do have firepower. Like, don't get it wrong, they have firepower. I was like, guys, yeah, like that's the team with Will Howard has a ton of firepower. It's just getting over what it actually looks like. The jerseys and everything. Everybody's just used to that being the ball control Snyder stuff.
And the head coach, Chris Kleeman, we had that at the beginning and the end of the broadcast for Chris Fowler. When Ben Sinnott scored his touchdown, we also had, the underused Ben Sinnott. I was like, okay, guys.
Justin Moore also made some nice plays for K-State. Herb Street kept talking about Justin Moore for the Wildcats on that strip fumble that somehow I don't know how that's not a fumble.
It's tough to get good announcers these days. Kurtz, maybe you need to get back in it.
Somebody call me. I mean, hit me up on Twitter at JL Kurtz. Slide in the DMs. I'd love to, man. I tried with that TV game. It's hard to get the opportunities. You got the Tim Brandos of the world taking them up. I guess they were better than Brando, but yeah, a little disappointed there with some of that. There were some things where I was like, all right, that was pretty well prepped. Like when Johnston caught the first go ball down the field on the first drive from Duggan, he was like, oh, it's just like in Fort Worth. Johnston beating Brents, and I was like, okay, at least we know Fowler watched that. And he got RJ Garcia. He knew who RJ Garcia was pretty much right away, which I would not have really blamed him if he didn't, because the guy had 5 catches on the year before making an incredible catch for a touchdown, which he's another unsung hero for stepping up and making that play. So
did he know Keenan Garber?
I haven't made it that far.
I don't recall them really.
They probably didn't know it was his number.
Yeah, I don't think
they. Like, who the hell is number 35?
Yeah, I don't recall them hitting on that. Look, they probably prepped Fowler on RJ Garcia when they found out Knowles was hurt, and at one of the commercial breaks said, "Look, this is the guy that's going to play more." So probably got equipped and ready to go with that one. So yeah, RJ Garcia had a big moment and a gutsy throw by Will Howard.
Indeed, it was. Good stuff all the way around. We'll keep you up to date on, obviously, the basketball season, what's going on with recruiting, because I don't think things are really going to slow down much here the next couple of weeks with all of that going on. Basketball did get another win. They have a tricky one coming up with Nebraska here pretty soon, too. Looking at the Cornhuskers beating Omaha, which is a very nice win. So, or excuse me, beating Creighton.
I thought you were just like throwing shade at Creighton, just going to call them Omaha. Like
no. I have no issues with Creighton. No issues with is McDermott still the coach there?
Yes.
Okay, I've got no issues with McDermott.
Creighton's a really good team. I mean, that's a top 10 team.
For a minute there, I thought that was your way of disrespecting Creighton.
I thought you were trying to take a shot.
No shot. I was just thinking like in my head, like, oh, Creighton's in Omaha. Where was the game at? Was the game? Can I say that the game was in Omaha at least, or was it in Lincoln?
It was in Creighton. It was at Creighton. It was on Creighton's home floor, right, which was even more shocking to me. And now Nebraska.
That's what I meant to say. It was just, they won in Omaha.
Nebraska is 78th in KenPom now, guys.
Are they really?
Wichita State. Well, they were like 100th, I think, going into that game. So that was a pretty big jump for them. Wichita State's 87th. So
what are we at?
K-State is 59, and LSU is 60. LSU would be K-State's best win. Right now, that would be a quad 2 win. Nebraska, I will have to double check. I'm not sure if it counts as a K-State home game and T-Mobile, because if it's a home game, that would be a quad 3 win, I believe, right now where they sit. Well, the net rankings aren't out yet, so we can't actually say that with certainty. But if you're ranked in the top 75 of the net, it'd be a quad 2 if it's a home game. If it's a neutral site game, they'd be a quad 2 where they sit currently. So
is Butler a quad 1 loss?
It's going to be a quad 2, John. They're 80. Well, again, the net rankings haven't came out, which is what that's based on. But Ken Palm is usually somewhat close to that, and Butler right now is 86th in Ken Palm. So it's going to be, it's not going to be a horrible loss, but it'll probably be a quad 2 loss.
Yeah. All right. Worst things have happened. Looked like a good crowd against Wichita State, and happy the Cats got the dub there. Okay. Appreciate the work of Jed Marshall behind the scenes, as always. Same with Tucker Franklin and all the work that he did for us over the past week, getting us on the air for the live show on Friday night in Arlington. That'll do it for us here at 3 Check out 360 Vodka, Ben Holiday Bottled and Bond Bourbon from Holiday Distillery. Drink up, enjoy the Big 12 Championship, and we will talk to you again.